Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Mr. Jairaj sir, can you tell something about your contemporaries while you were working with Bhaunani and some of the early talkie films?
Yes, that's a very fine question you asked, Mr. Narvekar. I think they deserve to be mentioned. It's almost now 4 years of my talkie life after 31 is 32, 33, 34, 35. 4 years. I met many people who helped me along in my journey to become a better star, a better human being, and a better technician or a better craftsman, I should say. When I came to Ajanta, this was again after my experience in Shikari. It's the second time I experienced that it was a very complete studio located at Parel. Mr. Bhaunani had every department scrupulously kept and cleaned and a good official supervision. So we had the sound, the camera, the scenario department, the setting department. We had some very talented people in doing settings. We had, I forget his name, we had one Dada who did some very great work as putting up realistic sets in those days. One thing I must say in this connection was Mr. Bhaunani. My experience with him is going to stood me well later on in my life. Mr. Bhaunani was a product of the UFA studios from Germany. He had come down fresh. He was a very handsome man himself too. I wonder why he didn't become an actor. So when he came down to India, he made a film in Imperial Studios called Telephone Girl with Sulochana, which became a perfect hit, and afterwards I think Sulochana became a star, and Mr. Bhaunani had come to stay. But Mr. Bhaunani's working was not slipshod as the other directors. He was very precise because of his German training, and he was a very good disciplinarian, and Ajanta Studios was run so well, and we are so happy. One more thing about Mr. Bhaunani I should say was that he had faith in his technicians and his artists and allowed them to do something creative in their own way. He did not restrict them. So that was a thing which was very rare, because we all in my profession, as you know, Mr. Narvekar, is that we suffer from a lot of ego. It was not there in Mr. Bhaunani. If he made a mistake, he would ask his assistant, is it right? Accordingly, is it the Hindu custom? He used to ask that. But he was very, very particular, very precise, and he used to do his own editing. He was a complete director, I should say. So that was my experience with Mr. Bhaunani. Then, in the course of working with Mr. Bhaunani, I had another good friend, and if I should use the word, he was a freak. He was known as Buddha Advani. He was a toothless wonder. And I said, did you pull out the tooth to become a comedian, or it has been like that? He says, no, every next generation in our family is toothless boys born, and I'm one of them. Well, he was a very good friend. He was from Karachi and very popular artist. Then Mr. Nayampalli, who was my senior when I met Mama Varerkar way back in the silent days. Nayampalli was one of our senior most people introduced by Mama Varerkar. Nayampalli, Mr. Altekar, who later became a very famous stage director, and he directed some films also like Vasavdatta, under which whom I worked. Then Nayampalli was one of those people with a very fine physique, and he had worked as Salim with Ezra Mir in his last picture when he left Imperial. He was rival to us because I belonged to a different camp in physical culture, and he belonged to one called Rao's Gymnasium, and I belonged to Hind Vyamshala. So we were always in the opposite parties. And he had a very fine body. So Palli had another facet to his acting talent, and that was makeup. And it was also mine. Makeup has been my weakness right from the beginning. And I used to follow a very famous character, I don't know if the youngsters of today have heard about him, was Lon Chaney, a man with 1,000 faces. Another person in the industry who was very famous and who tried different makeups was Mazhar Khan, who was then stationed at Calcutta. He used to make up different makeups, and also I was interested. And Nayampalli I saw the first time using false teeth and making up and all that sort of thing. He was very, very fond of makeup. And still remains one of my very good and dear friends. Then another young star who became a star later on was a leading lady called Sitara. She was hardly 15 or 16 when she the lead opposite me in a film called Aurat Ka Dil. She had come fresh from Banaras and she belonged to the great Kathak school. Though Sitara shined as a actress later on in Sagar Studios under Mr. Mehboob, but Sitara essentially has been a dancer, and till today she has carried off the tradition of Kathak dancing, and she's a name to reckon with. Then another artist I worked with was Padma Shaligram in a picture called Vasav Datta. Of course, now she has become a very famous vocalist. So these are some of the people, very, very good friends, I should say, people with whom you would love to spend your time and learn something. This has been my experience. Here I must say something about makeup, as I told you before. I was very fond of makeup and I used to try experiments. And later on, when I did a film called Pardesi, when I went to Moscow to do this, I had a free permission to wander around in their makeup rooms, and I probably am the first man, as a leading man, who has used a false nose in a historical film, because my mentor in makeup was Paul Muni. I treated him like a guru, because after his great films like Good Earth and Voorhees and so many other films that he did, so I used to follow. And here in makeup, I should say, by this time, in early stages of our makeup was that our makeup used to come from Germany. They were known as Leichner's products. So we had sticks they used to use on the stage also. This Leichner tubes used to be mixed and just applied to your face and powdered and cleaned up. But later on, sophistication came into makeup, and Max Factor, a name to reckon with, is still very popular from Hollywood. We started getting their products. But in the meantime, I must say my experience later on in Prabhat and other studios was that our makeup men didn't have the means, but they had the brains to create makeup. For instance, in Prabhat, all the powders were made locally by them, ground and made powder. They used to make their own spirit gum and they used to make their own crepe hair, trimming sheep. If they wanted red color, brown colored sheep used to be the brown makeup hair, black was a black makeup hair. That is how indigenously we used to carry on. And I think our craftsmen are no less than the Western people. Of course, they have all the means. They can experiment and they can create makeup. We don't have it. But anyhow, after this era of doing my picture with Mr.
Devki Babu, I think that we stopped at that point.
Yeah.
And soon after Devki Babu, I think you went to Indus Film Corporation and did 2 films for them.
Yes. I went to Karachi.
Yes.
In Karachi, see, they wanted to start a film industry. There was one gentleman, Captain Dudani, who signed me up, and I went to Karachi. And surprisingly, one of my co-stars was Ram Panjwani, who later became a very good friend of mine. Then he became a professor in Jai Hind College and all that. So he played the villain opposite me in a first picture called Berozgar, and my co-star was Leela Chitnis. And another gentleman was called Israni, who later became famous by making the Sony radios and things like that. So this is the Karachi unit. The conditions were, of course, a little primitive in Karachi, but I did 2 films there under the conditions and then returned back. One of them did very well. That was my first film with Leela Chitnis, in which Ram Panjwani played the villain. And after that, I came back to Bombay again to join the mainstream of our production.
Then I think you did Tufani Khazana at that point for Firdos Pictures.
Yes. I came and made a picture that was probably sort of a naval picture, sea and ships and all that sort of thing, of a buried treasure. That was the type of story we did. And we shot all our outdoors in Goa, carried our own equipment, and we shot in Goa. And there used to be a ship called Anthony, motor ship that used to leave Bombay and go to Goa. So we used to shoot all the scenes on the ship on the passage to Goa, on the return passage from Goa, and when the boat was stationary in the Bombay dock, we used to shoot. So that was my picture. One more thing in that picture was, my booklets will bear me witness, I did the art direction, costume designing, I was the production manager and the hero of the picture also. and take interest in the screenplay, because one of the producers, G.K. Mehta, was a friend of mine. So all along, you must have noticed, Mr. Narvekar, that I have still today, I remain a student. I still do not profess that I know much about my profession. So I'm keen to learn. Even today, I'm very keen to learn everything possible. But the whole thing has become so vast. In those days, we were confined. We could do a better job. Later on, when I finished this picture, SS Jaldevi as it was called, I signed up with a firm called Saroj Movie Tone. There, it was under Nanubai Desai, who incidentally was one of the partners of Sharda Film Company, and he had left Sharda Film Company before I joined. So again, there is a connection that I was Sharda star. He gave me a little preference. So I started work there. In there, I worked with that very famous artist, Khurshid, was my co-star in a couple of films there. I made 3 films there with her. Then I worked, there was another director about whom I must speak. He called himself the Charlie Chaplin from India. He was called Saki. He directed a film called Murad for me. He was a story writer, screenplay writer, director, cameraman, sound recordist, and also poster painter. You could imagine what a big, he covered all the departments of filmmaking. Very, very ingenious, I must say. He shot some scenes which later on another director with whom when it comes to that, I'll refer, how they managed in our country without the equipment. For instance, he said, we are taking a traveling shot of your talking, and you're riding and talking. I said, you see, rarely in those days the microphone moved. The moment in the microphone came, it was later on. It became mobile later on. Otherwise, we used to have fixed microphones for a shot. I said, Saki साहब कैसे करेंगे आप? बोले कोई बात नहीं है. He just gave a clap and said, you speak the dialogue. I spoke the dialogue. The shot was okayed. And later on, the dubbing hadn't come in those days. But later on, the dialogue I spoke and somehow managed in the editing room to have the same shot properly done. So he was very ingenious. I was for almost a year, and then I made a film which made me a star overnight.
Before we come to that, 2 other directors you worked with at Saroj Movie Tone. One was Zia Sarhadi, who made Afsana,
Yes.
who directed Afsana, and
Yes.
the other one was R.S. Chaudhary,
Yeah.
who did Rifle Girl.
I'm coming to that. You see, Zia was one of those educated socialistic types who was not bound by tradition. And of course, he had a bit of Marxist leanings. And this Afsana was a very bold story about a journalist who is not afraid to expose corruption. And Zia was a very dynamic man. Later on, he made a very fine film called Hum Log for Ranjit. So that was my experience with Zia. Then I met R.S. Chaudhary, whom I revered from a long time, even from the silent days. He was the leading director for Imperial Films and a very, very imaginative man. And I could learn, and I could say he's one of my Siksha gurus, I could very frankly say. He was also thorough. He came from Banaras. He was very well educated. And he used to write his own screenplays, his own dialogues, and direct his own pictures. So here I come to a film called Rifle Girl. Before that, I think I'll crave your indulgence by or telling a small story. He planned a story called Kal Ki Baat with myself as the lead, Rose as the heroine, and Mubarak as the villain. It was a story of the period of Huns, invasion of the Huns in India. So everything was ready. We rehearsed for a month. Our costumes were fitted. And the day of shooting arrived. But a day previously, when I went down to the studio, because probably I never told you before, that our main method of transport was a tram car. By that time, though I was a star, or though everything, we still travel in trams, because there was not much of audience recognition or adulation as we have these days. They just said, oh, he's a film actor, chalo yaar, theek hai, uski picture dekhe. They just speak a few words. So we were not ashamed to travel by trams or anything. Bus was a luxury, and we could not think of a taxi also in those days. So anyhow, I walked up to the studio. At the studio gate, I found it was all spruced up and decorated with flowers, and I asked the watchman, क्या हो रहा है इधर? बोले कोची साहब आप तो ये तो पिक्चर शुरू हो गई आज चौधरी साहब का. मैंने कहा चौधरी साहब का पिक्चर शुरू हो गया, कौन सा है? बोले वो साहब Chaudhary Saab ka picture, and suddenly what I see walking across towards the studio was Mr. Surendranath wearing my own costume for which I had done the fitting and which role I had rehearsed. I did not know what to do. Suddenly, I didn't go into the studio. As after all, a human being, I said, we do get the shocks in our profession, the good and the bad of it. I was very much disappointed. I came home. But later on in the evening, Chaudhary Saab came and said, look, son, we worked very hard. I promised you this role. But last night at 11 o'clock, the change took place, and today I'm shooting. I couldn't make any change because Nanubai Desai insisted that you must have singers for it. And Jairaj is not a singer. So that is why Surendranath has come, and instead of Rose, Durga Khote has come. I said, fair enough. But he promised me that if I make a picture, my next picture, whoever is the producer will be with you. And that picture is Rifle Girl, which gave me first time a sort of a social status, star status in the film industry. And we did that picture. It was a picture story of the Northwest frontier provinces. And Mr. Chaudhary was a man with a lot of imagination, and he was very, very artistic. He was a painter himself. So beautiful costumes were made, lovely locations, lovely sets, and the picture was a superb hit. And Chaudhary Saab afterwards, later on when I became a director, most of my screenplays were written by Chaudhary Saab. And I always, whenever I was in any problem, I used to go and consult him. He was almost like a guide, philosopher, a friend for me. But he was a much maligned man, as the industry thought of. But still, with all due respect, I think he was a great man. And after this, again, there is a spell. As actors, as I told you before, I was resting. That means I was out of job again. And then I met a gentleman called Acharya who took me to Bombay Talkies. This is in the year 1938. He took me to Bombay Talkies. Mr. Himanshu Roy looked up and down and said he will do. And that was the beginning of my picture Bhabi for Bombay Talkies. Here again, I've been so lucky in my career that I could find groups and units of people which were congenial to my way of thinking, good people, educated, things like that. And they were all dedicated people doing their jobs. And when I went to Bombay Talkies, it was a very, very complete studio. They had their own recording, their own laboratory, their own laundry even there, their own dress department, their own property. Everything was so organized because, once again, I must tell you that Mr. Himanshu Roy was a product from UFA. He had a lot of German technicians. There was German cameraman, German director, German lab expert. So then they had a German called von Spreti for sets. Mr. Wershing was our cameraman. Franz Austin was the director. And you're so, I should say, happy with working those people because they had discipline. What we lacked in our different units was lack of discipline. Everything went like a clockwork in Bombay Talkies. So I entered Bombay Talkies, and the picture was called Bhabi. It was an adaptation of a Bengali novel called Vishur Dhua. And I was so happy working in Bombay Talkies in those days because everything was so different, so organized. The other company later on when I worked, I found which had a parallel to Bombay Talkies, was Prabhat Studios. So in Bombay Talkies, we started work. And here I must tell you the method of working Bombay Talkies had. They used to have 22 copies of the shooting script distributed to various departments, one to the hero, one to the heroine, one to the assistant director, one to the sound engineer, one to the cameraman, one to the costume department, one to the production department. So everybody knew what they had to do. They didn't have to come and ask, Saab, kya karna hai mujhe? Everybody, they said, you know what you have to do. I'm paying you for what you have to do. You see, that attitude we have in foreign pictures also. If I'm paid to do something, I have to do that. I don't have to ask how to do it. You are accepted to do your work. That is why many of our artists now, of course, are very lucky, I must say, about the circumstances in which they are placed, that everything is found ready for them. In those days, it was not like that. But anyhow, in Bombay Talkies, we used to work regularly like clockwork, report at 7:30 in the morning, and at 8 o'clock you used to be on the set. And 8:30 the camera used to grind, whether it was rain, shine, wet or fine, the camera used to grind exactly at 8:30. And next morning, The rushes were seen, and if there are any retakes to be done, done. And Mr. Himans Roy, like clockwork, used to make a picture every 10 weeks and make 4 pictures a year regularly for Bombay Talkies. That was because of his complete planning and discipline. And one interesting thing which I think is still not observed in our film industry, as far as I know, is the costumes that we used in the morning. A duplicate costume washed from the laundry was used for the next afternoon shift. And when you came the next day, the clothes were again washed and we had fresh clothes. So you can understand, for an artist, when you have clothes which is not stinking after 2 or 3 days of work, it is a different thing. So Bombay Talkies were very, very particular about these things. So the artists had no cause to complain. And Bombay Talkies, when I finished Bhabi, it was one of my greatest successes. It ran for 70 weeks at Calcutta, and it was the first non-Devika picture that became a hit, Bombay Talkies. With Bombay Talkies and Rifle Girl, I became an established star even in the talkies.
I think a little before that, let me take you back to the 37. You did a picture called Saki with J.P. Advani.
Yes.
Any memories of that?
It was one of those usual entertainment films. Khurshid was my heroine in that. And it is one of those romances that you have with fancy costumes and things like that. And it had very good music because Khurshid was a singer herself. So that picture had done well.
Okay, now we come to the period of Prakash Pictures, immediately after Bombay Talkies.
Yes.
With Vijay Bhatt, you did about 4 films. And your career as a director also began in this year.
Yes. So after Bombay Talkies, I could not break into any of the established concerns like Ranjit or Sagar and all that, because they had their own. Motilal was there in Sagar, and Ranjit, the Billimorias were there. So I started with Prakash Pictures. There again I signed a year's contract with them. And my first picture with them was with Vijay Bhatt as the director. Myself and Mehta was the heroine. It was an action-oriented film again, but very well made. Prakash Pictures had their own studios, their laboratory. It was another complete studio, very good atmosphere. But later on, of course, they started making remarkable films like Ramraj and Narsi Bhagat and all that. So my first picture was with Vijay Bhatt, which had a good run. Then another picture I made with them with Balwant Bhatt called Bijli. Then another film again I made with Vijay Bhatt, which was called Eki Bhool, in which the child star was Meena Kumari, who worked with us as my daughter in that film. And there was another thing which the Prakash people, being ambitious, they had a technician called Dutt, Prahlad Dutt, who had perfected a process called the Dunning process, which he got from America, that you could superimpose so many things. Later on, he did the flying wall scene for Prabhat, Jnaneshwar. He was there with us. So the other picture which was planned by Mr. Vijay Bhatt was an ambitious film called Eki Bhool, in which the idea was taken from H.G. Wells' Invisible Man and the Lost Souls. I think it was another book by H.G. Wells. So in which there is a transference of souls. And I both played the hero and villain. It was not a double role, but the same character playing the hero and the villain. When the villain's soul entered my body, I was villain, and when I was normal, I was the hero. So all the trick works which we did there, and now for the present generation, you see it in Mr. India. We did that in those days, and Babubhai Mistry was beginning to learn the trade of making trick works. So that was my film Eki Bhool with Vijay Bhatt. Then in the course of our talks, they said, why don't you direct a film? I said, it has been my pet desire all along, but I didn't have an occasion for it. So I decided on a story from Sir Hall Caine's Master of Man and gave it to Mr. Madhok, very famous writer and a lyricist. So he wrote the screenplay and the music for it. And this picture, I must say, is remarkable for a few things. In this picture, Mr. Naushad Ali started his career as a music director.
We are talking of Mala now.
Mala. So I was a co-director in that film with another friend, Mahendra Nath. So We did that film with Rose as the heroine and Jayant as the hero, and myself playing another role. It was an average film, but it was, I think, it was quite an artistic film, very well made. And after that, I left Prakash Pictures.
I think the first film you made for Prakash Pictures is Leatherface.
Leatherface.
Farzande Watan.
Farzande Watan.
Right.
So I left Prakash after serving them for a year, and back again, I was resting for some time.
Then I think V.M. Vyas, the man who started as a
Yeah.
in the silent days. Yeah.
So V.M. Vyas wanted to make a picture. It was called Prabhat.
Yes, we were talking about a film called Prabhat.
Yes, I was signed up by Mr. V.M. Vyas, of whom, if I remember, I made a reference long back that he used to announce films. By that time, Mr. V.M. Vyas, who was essentially a cameraman, had made a studio called Kumar Studios. Later on, it became Mohan Studios. Then Asif took over the studios. Then Bimal Roy took over the studios at Andheri. He is that very famous V.M. Vyas. V.M. Vyas, as a director, was a very, very successful director making social films, social tearjerkers, what you call. His stories were written by one Mr. Mohanlal Dave, M.G. Dave as it's called. Mr. Mohanlal Dave used to write ups about films, short stories, when films were released right from the silent days, the story of the film, and it is to be distributed to the public in general. That was M.G. Dave. Then he became a story writer. Mr. Vyas used to go to him, get his complete story and scenario written, and have a complete script. And he used to make his pictures within 2 months. So this Prabhat, I worked with another Prabhat star called Shanta Hublikar. She was also late from Prabhat. It was a college romance. We did some outdoor shooting with that Nasik. My co-stars were Majid, then there is another famous comedian, Mirza Musharraf. So that was pictures finished in time and released. And that is the first picture in which I broke my own record of rising above 300 rupees a month. And the first time I got a little more. That was the first step in my financial. After so many years, I think I got a break there. And Mr. Vyas was the first man to give me. Here I must tell you about Mr. Vyas's technique, and which had become very famous, and I wanted to learn it. Mr. Vyas would say, "Look, Jay, I want you for a couple of hours." I said, "Look, I'm shooting in another place. How can you come and work with it?" He said, "You just give me 1 hour for lunch." All right. He was an expert, being a cameraman. He used to shoot the full scene, delete certain things, and leave you in proper time. Then when you had 1 hour, he had those corners made and shoot my close-ups. And when edited, you never felt the difference. And he probably made his pictures in the cheapest way. There were no retakes in his films, and absolutely in time, and he used to make a lot of money, and he made a lot of money, believe me. And that is my first exposure to Mr. V.M. Vyas. Later on also I made a picture called Dhanwan with him, in which he did not take a playback for me. He said, "I'll take direct." I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Yes, I'll do it." I said, "What am I supposed to do?" "You're singing a lori to your own child." I said, "All right." He brought a musician, a tabalchi and a harmonium, and kept a microphone there. And he started singing, and I was giving the lip movement, and it was a direct music take plus playback. So very, very ingenious. And he had a way with him. He used to do his whole complete editing, screenplay writing, and he never wasted a single pie. He was absolutely everything on schedule he used to do. So that was my experience with Prabhat and Shanta Hublikar. We did this in Nasik under a very good atmosphere. And picture was, as usual, was not a hit, but not a loss either. It was well received by the people. Then in the course of doing that picture, I went back to Kardar Studios. By that time, Mr. Bhavnani had left Ajanta Cinetone, and it was taken over by Kardar. He was planning a picture called Swami. In Swami, the story, somebody said it is from Munshi Premchand, but there was another famous writer from Lahore. They said it was his story. Anyhow, in that, it was a very nice social film, and this is the first time I worked with Mr. Kardar. He is again a product like the UFA. Everything was completely storyboard. Shooting his screenplays, everything was so complete that he used to start a picture and finish it in time. And he never used to have rushes taken of his film. He used to direct his negative, he used to cut and then have the prints ready. Because he knew what he was shooting. Every shot and every frame was absolutely done. And I really enjoyed working in Swami because Sitara was my heroine and my co-stars were Yaqub, Majid and Jeevan. And Jeevan, though we were very good friends, always used to complain. He said, Jai, this Kardar is making me a comedian. I'm an established villain. I said, he's doing it, he knows what he has to do. So he worked, and after that, it was another takeoff for his career, Jeevan's career. He became a comedian villain sort of thing. And Yaqub was there, as usual, a very fine, polished artist. Though we were friends from the silent days, this is the first time I worked with Yaqub. Then Majid, and the picture was a hit and very well received. And after I finished Swami, I was so happy working with Kardar because his system, as I told you, was again the German system. 10 rehearsals, 12 rehearsals till you're absolutely perfect and then a take. While the other people used to just take a rehearsal and said, I take me kar lunga yaar, you start the camera sort of feeling was not there. Everything was so precise and correct. So I enjoyed working with Kardar. And after that, I worked with another talented director who of course was, I won't use the word uneducated in the literary sense, was Dada Gunjal. I made a picture called Kirti with him. And the story was by Rangnikar. The same story was remade, Raj Kapoor playing my role and Meena Kumari playing the role of the heroine in a film called Sharda. Rangnikar's story. This starred myself, and you'll be surprised who was my heroine for the first time. Was good old Lalita Pawar. She played my lead. So by that time, Jagdish Shetty was also in that film. You know what was the nickname he gave me then? He said, Jai, you're like a ringmaster. So many heroines you have had, what's the matter? How do you manage it? I said, well, I'm working, that's all I can know. So Lalita Pawar was my leading lady in that. It will come as a surprise to so many people that she was my heroine. And Dada Gunjal was a very talented man. As far as the technical word of taking comes in, he was something superb. But on the whole, the picture is to suffer unless it had a screenplay. Kirti was very well received. And after finishing Kirti, I went back again to my good old mentor, Kardar, in a film called Nai Dunya. And this was the beginning of a long, long friendship I had with Mr. Abbas. He had made a picture called Naya Sansar for Bombay Talkies with Ashok Kumar. Then the other series, I had the privilege of working in Nai Dunya, Nai Tarana, Nai Kahani. All the 3 pictures were Abbas stories. They're all socialistic type of stories. So Nai Dunya, here again one of my old veteran stars whom I respected, I had the pleasure of working, that was Mazhar Khan. As I told you before, Mazhar was very famous for his makeup and get-up and all that. So in that, my co-star was Shobna Samarth, Mazhar Khan, Azuri and Harish Dusani. We worked in that picture. It was a story of a taxi driver. Later on, the same sort of theme was played by Premnath and also by Devanand later on as taxi driver. Here it was known as Nai Dunya. And I was so happy again working with Kardar that we finished, and the picture was from the Kardar Productions, one of his hit films. And what always intrigued me and made me feel very happy is to work on time. And Prabhat, like Bombay Talkies, was everything on time. So that was a very good experience I had. And after I finished Nai Dunya, I stuck to Pune because I was commuting between Pune and Bombay. Then I was contacted by Mr. W.Z. Ahmed to star opposite Nina in a film called Prem Sangeet. W.Z. Ahmed was a man with a vision. He had the finest writers in every department. He had Sagar Nizami as a poet. Then we had this poet laureate, I'll just tell you his name. Then Bharat Vyas. He had a set of writers. And he made this Prem Sangeet, in which I played again a reporter. The picture was very well received, very well done, and people still remember me because of that film still. And staying back in Pune, I was contacted again by Navyug Studios and made again a Abbas film called Naya Tarana, directed by Najam Naqvi, and my co-star was Snehaprabha Pradhan. Nai Tarana was the story between the zamindar and the farmer. As usual, you know how Mr. Abbas's stories are. So I finished that film, and then I came back to Bombay and I did a small film in between called Rahat, in which, because every film that I'm mentioning to you, there is something has happened, somebody new has been there. In Rahat, Sardar Akhtar, famous star, played my mother's role. And I respected her for her beautiful performance. I mean, say, unforgettable performance in Aurat. And it was a privilege working with her. And one more thing I must tell about Sardar Akhtar is that very few artists I have met, since then of course I met many more, who had a phenomenal memory. She could get her lines, a full page of lines, in 5 minutes should be ready for take. In between, when I had to speak, I had to have all my faculties, keyed up so that I should not make a mistake and the take would go wrong. So that is my experience with Sardar Akhtar, and it was a very delightful experience. So I did Rahat there, and back again to my old alma mater, my college was Bombay Talkies, in which I did Hamari Baat. And here I must mention, with all my due respects to Devika Rani, that she said, Jay, after I finished Bhabi, he said, I'll wait for you till you play my hero. And she did wait for me, and that was her last swan song, Hamari Baat. She played opposite me, and directed by Amay Chakravarti, and a very nice socialistic story. In this, by the time the Bombay Talkies had forked up, one was Bombay Talkies, the other was Filmistan. So Mrs. Rai, as we used to call Devika Rani, had some of the finest writers like Narendra Sharma, the poet, and then we had Mr. Bhagavati Charan Verma, all these writers, you see, very eminent writers from Hindi thing. She started her own unit, and this picture, Anil Bishwas gave the music for it, and it was quite a landmark, and the lyrics are still very popular with some of the musicologists who have kept it. So Hamari Baat was made in Bombay Talkies, and after that I became a Bombay Talkies man and stayed in Bombay Talkies and became a full-fledged director in Pratima.
Can you say something about Pratima? Because I think it stars Dilip Kumar, who is still very popular.
Oh, Dilip Kumar is a legend. He's not only popular, I should say. You see, Mrs. Rai wanted new talent, and she picked him up at, I think, Nasik or someplace. He's a college-going boy. He's not a graduate, but he was in the Khalsa College here, but working in wartime somewhere in Mahu or someplace there. She liked him and gave him an audition and signed him up. His first picture was Johar Bhata, in which Agha was the hero and he played the second lead, and opposite him was another artist called Mridula. So after that, when I was given the chance of a direction, my picture was not Pratima. I had a story called Dashera, written by Krishan Chandra. He did the screenplay, and it was an adaptation of Tolstoy's Resurrection. So we were all ready to do that, but Mrs. Rai said, no, first we'll do this Pratima. We'll do that later on. It was postponed, shelved again. So Pratima was there. That was my first independent direction. And I had no problems because all the headaches used to be with the producer. He has to supply the script, the artist, the script, dialogues, everything. I had to only channelize all these things into making a picture direction. And with all the comforts and the confidence that you get in an established studio, I had all that and made Pratima there. And also in that, I played a small role of a Daku, bearded and all that sort of thing. So that I did not leave my connection as an actor, though I became a director. So Pratima finished and it was released. It was an averagely received film. It was not a flop. It was an averagely received. But it did not give me a directorial career. That I must say about that.
But was a directorial career in your mind at that point?
No, I wanted to fork out, to keep direction and acting together. Because as you know, later on, some of the artists have become directors and producers and remain both. For instance, I think the best example I can give you is Devanand, who's still an actor, director, and a producer all rolled into one. Because an actor, we don't have roles written for us, especially as they do it in the foreign countries. Here you have to fit in a slot, that's all. Either you are a father or your mother, or I mean, say, you are an uncle, or you're a villain, or you're a hero. It's all set up in a slot. But your stories are not specially written. Now it's being done now. The last 4 or 5 years, they're writing stories to suit the personalities. In our time, it was not like that. So whatever is offered, you had to take it. That's all. But in every artist's mind, there is a little space which is reserved in his brain that one day I'll become a director. Because a director has more freedom than an actor. As an actor has more freedom on the stage than the director, because director stops after direction and the actor takes over on the stage between himself and the audience. The rapport is between them. But here it's so different. Here the director is a more important man than the actor. So in the heart of every actor, there is that little space that one day I'll become a director. I think one of the recent examples I can tell you about Sachin. When we did this film with Mr. Dilip Kumar, Bairag, in which he played a triple role, Sachin was there, almost like a child artist. And today Sachin is a very established and a successful director. So back of every artist is one day I'd become a director, because he feels that he has been graduated and has more freedom. Some people experiment with their own money, and some people experiment with other people's money, and some succeed and some fail. That is the fate of it later on.
Just one more question. You said that the Bombay talkies followed German system.
And that's also followed in America.
Now, it is the producer who is deciding the script and the story and all that.
Yes.
And you are an director of the assignment.
Right.
So, do you feel that there was a problem in tuning with the subject? Now, here you said that you wanted to do Dashera, and now this was foisted on you.
Yes.
So, what is your creative reaction to the material that is supplied? How do you build an empathy with it?
Yes. What happens is that a subject is selected. Dashera was a subject that I had selected and approved by Mrs. Rai to do that film. But later on they found out that the proposition was a little more expensive. It included outdoors, because Bombay Talkies never believed in going outdoors. I don't think in the history of Bombay Talkies, as far as I know, that they have gone outside Bombay. They make their sets and everything indoor only. So this Dashera was, a lot of shooting had to be done in Rajasthan. So again, coordinating the units and taking a unit back there and all that. So that was one of the factors. Now, the question that you asked about is, it is not that something is forced onto you. If you are involved in the story right from the beginning, its inception, and we grow with it, so it is not difficult for us to change over from one story to another. I have done that as an actor, which I'll tell you later on. I have done that as an actor. I've been rehearsed for a role. Once it happened before, in the time of Rifle Girl. It happened again with me later on in another Abbas's film called Char Dil Char Rahein. So that when you grow with the story, and then you know that you're going to be assigned into it, you get involved in the whole subject. And then it goes on and on and all that. So there is no problem at all.
Right. I think after Bombay Talkies, you came back to Ranjit, I think.
Yes. Ranjit, I came back because I was doing a historical film called Rajputani. My co-star was Veena. Here again, I beg to remind you that R.S. Chaudhary's story and screenplay was there, Rajputani. Wherever and whenever he had his stories and he found that I fitted a role, he insisted the producer that, well, you pick up Jairaj and for this role he suits. So this was a story of Maharana Pratap, and they had brought specially Mr. Bipin Gupta from Calcutta to play Rana Pratap, and I played his younger brother called Shakti Singh, and my opposite co-star was Veena. And Veena was one of the very elegant, reserved stars of those times. I don't think I'm wrong when I say that she was like Greta Garbo of India, all to herself, never very social, but a very fine personality and a very fine actress at that. So she played opposite me, and we shot all this film on the background of Rana Pratap's story at Udaipur on actual locales where it happened. It is there I learnt, when you make historical pictures, that when you shoot on the locales that the incident has taken place, it had a, I won't use the word psychic or say ethereal, it has a certain force. The impact is felt by the audience. Later on, when I did a film called Amar Singh Rathore, I was there where Amar Singh jumped his horse from the battlements. I did the same thing and stopped there. And the impact was so much. In that very film, I was stabbed by my own brother-in-law when I entered a low gate. And it was the same gate in which he was stabbed, the actual scene was shot. Somehow I felt that the impact is always there. So in Rajputani, we shot most of the films, the Battle of Haldighat and everything was at Udaipur.
Mr. Jairaj sir, now that we have reached 1946-47 and the talkies have been established at this point, I think we should take pause and compare the silent era and the talkies.
Yes, I think at this stage it's a very good thing. We can value the problems we had in the silent days and in the talkies. Before that, what I would like to explain is the star system. The star system started in the silent days. Of course, we inherited this from the American film industry. As I spoke to you before, a silent film was two-dimensional. And film being a visual art, whatever is seen is remembered. So in silent days, one advantage was there. A silent film had a universal language. You could show a picture, say in China, you can show a picture in Africa, you can show a picture in America, and everybody could understand the medium of a silent film and enjoy the picture or whatever the picture was. So as soon as the talkies came, there was a restriction. There is a language which had come over. So now in the world there are so many languages, so naturally pictures of different languages are made. Then the idiom of picture making changed. Those star systems still continued in the talkies and it is still there and it will always be there. The star system is that the audience associates a particular star and enjoys his work. So he becomes a star. But it's not necessarily a star is an actor, but an actor can be a star. Because a star who's a matinee idol plays himself over again and the people accept that characterization. While an actor has to make a character of a role that he is making. So this is the basic difference between a star and an actor, which still continues in the talkie days. Now you will say, what happens to a star? A picture is announced, they go and want to see their star. Not what is in the picture, not the character is playing. That is a star. But when you have a film in which there are actors, they are playing a different role. You go and see the picture for the roles they play and not because they are their favorite stars. This is the basic difference between a star and an actor. So as soon as the talkies came in the silent days, you could be very imaginative, you could enjoy yourself, see a film and make your own deductions and enjoy it. But as soon as the talkies came, the characterization, the third dimension came in and it became a definite thing. So now is a character, a living character, maybe your next door neighbor. So it became more truthful. The approach to a character in the talkies was different than the silent. While both were different mediums, that is what we have to understand. The silent film is a different medium and the talkie film is a different medium. Of course, when the talkies came, it had it took a lot of inspiration from stage, because stage is a spoken word, while a talkie film is both spoken and seen in intimacy. In stage, what happens, you have a proscenium and you have a fixed outlook and you start imagining whoever is talking. But in a film, it is an intimate medium. He can come into a close-up or a mid-shot, you can go outdoors, you can come indoors. This is the basic difference between a stage and a talkie film. So, and of course, as I said before, this is a different medium altogether. So this is what we have to understand, that silent films was a different medium and talkie films is a different medium.
The years 1940 to 45, 46, even 47 were turbulent years, not only for the world, particularly for India because of the partition, the war years. The character of the film industry was also changing and you were a witness to these changes. Can you?
Yes. You see, actually they started when the war started in 1929, if I remember correctly somewhere in October or so, the Second World War started. The whole social pattern changed of people living, their earnings, everything changed so differently, and a certain tenseness crept into people, and they wanted to have an outlet for these. And the best outlet was a film. So in the war years, many producers came over, and new producers came over and started making films. In this influx, what happened was that the quality suffered. They made a film, they made it entertaining, and the only idea was how much profit they could make with about that film. So it went on. So we made a number of pictures, new producers came in. The whole thing, the whole idiom of filmmaking changed in the war years. And the films that were made, especially one film of mine I remember, it suffered because of the war years, and that was a film called Shah Jahan. It was made by Mr. Kardar and made with a lot of dedication, and we had one of the finest artists with us called Mr. Achrekar, who did our designs. Then we had a famous cameraman, Mr. Divecha, and he selected artists entirely to suit the character and the roles, and I had the good fortune of working with Mr. Saigal. That was probably his last film and my first film with Mr. Saigal. And I was a fan of his right from the days of Devdas. So this film was made. The story was about how Taj Mahal was built, and I played a Persian ambassador who designs the Taj, a Persian ambassador who was also an artist and an architect who designed this film Taj. Mr. Kardar lavished all the care. It was probably in those days as big a film as Mughal-e-Azam, and the language also was very nice so that people could understand. And this particular film, as you asked me, suffered because of the war years and the partition. And it did not get the credit as it should have deserved. But I think it's one of the finest costume films made at that time. And it was quite successful because of the music.
After Shahjahan, I think you made Sasi Punnu.
The Sasi Punnu was the same star cast. We were in Panna, myself and Geeta Nizami. As you know, in the Western films, every artist goes through a film which is a boxing film. I remember even the great artists like Clark Gable, so many other people, they all went through this phase of playing a boxer. So it comes down that in Indian films also, the heroes have all gone through some of this fabled love stories like Romeo and Juliet, Sasi Punnu, Heer Ranja, the Shirin Farhad and things like that. And I had also my share of doing this romantic film called Sasi Punnu, for which we went to Karachi, the actual locales where this happened, and it had very good music. But again, this film suffered because of the war years.
You went to Karachi for Sasi Punnu, but this was in 1946-47. You must have witnessed the...
No, I was there. If I'm correct, I should say that in January 47, I was in Karachi, and August 47, we had partition. I could meet all my old friends there. And Karachi, I have some very fine memories because it was considered one of the cleanest cities in India once upon a time. I can't take a brief now of what it is like. So, well, we did Sasi Punnu, then came back, and
Dhanwan.
I made another film with Mr. V.M. Vyas called Dhanwan, in which again I played a double role. The idea of the story was from Gate's poem called The Song of Varda, that is the thing of a man who is very poor and becomes rich and sells his soul, and then again leaves all his friends and everything, then he reforms. This has been done both on the stage, and it was also called Faust. So that is in a social film which we did, and as I told you, it's probably my second or third double role I have done. After that, I did a comedy with one of the leading singers of the country that time, Noor Jahan, in a film called Hamjoli. It was just a light comedy, but it was a pleasure working with all those people. Of course, we revived our memories when Noor Jahan came here for a function called Mortal Men and Immortal Music, which I had the pleasure of presenting to the audience. And we had Noor Jahan again. It was sort of a reunion. And after that, I made a film called Manmani, which was Sir Bernard Shaw's play, made famous by Rex Harrison. It was called the
My Fair Lady.
My Fair Lady, but that is not the
Pygmalion is the original.
Pygmalion is the original. That's right. It was. I played opposite Ragini, who played Shah Jahan's wife Mumtaz. It was a pleasure working with there, and we had a very nice, elegant director whose pictures were always supposed to be elegant and clean and nice, and that was Mr. Badami. And after that,
You returned to Ranjit.
yes, I returned to Ranjit and made a romance called Bela. The thing was, at that time, the Ranjit was almost going to be closed, and they wanted me for this film Bela. Previously, I had done one for them called Rajputani. This was a musical, and Nigar Sultana was my lead, and very good lyrics and music by Mr. Madhok.
I think Mr. S.N. Tripathi was also acting in the film.
Yes, S.N. Tripathi was both an actor and a music director. His association with me is from Bombay Talkies when he was an assistant to Saraswati Devi, the music director in Bombay Talkies. So he is a director, a music director on his own, and also is fond of acting. After that, I worked in a number of pictures. Again, we worked together in a film called Hatim Tai, where he played a role. So as usual, I don't know, sometimes some films prove lucky for an artist proves lucky to a studio, and Ranjit got another new lease of life after this film because they had a series of flops. First it was Rajputani who put them again, then it was Bela.